In example 5, I'm going to go over how you can interpret the meaning of the slope in a context. So in this example, it says a college charges a flat rate per class. From a graph, we observe that the total cost increases from 600 to 900. So let's write that down. The cost increases from 600 to 900 as the number of classes taken increases from 2 to 3 classes. So the classes would increase 2 to 3. We're going to find the slope and interpret the meaning in the context of this situation. So the cost depends on the number of classes. So as the classes change, that's what causes the cost to change. So the cost is the y value, the dependent variable. Again, that's because the value of y depends on the number of classes that are taken. Now, the number of classes is the independent variable, and that's your x. So if I want to take the information from this context, when the number of classes is 2, the cost is 600. So that's my ordered pair. 2 goes with 600. Now, when the number of classes goes up to 3, the cost goes up to 900. So I have an ordered pair, 3 and 900. Those go together. Remember that x is the number of classes because that's the independent variable, and cost is the dependent variable, which is the y value. Now, if I want to find the slope, it's the change in y over the change in x, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So if I call this x1 and y1, x2 and y2, y2 minus y1 would be 900 minus 600, which is 300. And x2 minus x1, that's 3 minus 2, which is 1. And when we simplify that, we can just write it as 300. Now, to interpret this, remember what the x and y values represent. That is key to understanding how to interpret the slope, because the y's represent the cost. 300 is the change in the cost. Because the x's represent the number of classes, 1 is the change in the number of courses. So when we interpret this, we would say the slope is 300, and that means that as the number of classes increase by 1, right, because that was the change in x, the cost increases by $300. So this is why it's key to understand which is your x and which variable is your y, so that you can understand it's the change in y, what does that mean? It's the change of x, what does that mean? Now, this isn't the case where the slope is negative, but if I had a negative in front of that 300, I would say that the cost decreased by 300. All right, so let's look at another interpretation of slope. It costs $46,700 to produce 650 items, and it costs $40,100 to produce 540 items. We're going to find the slope and interpret its meaning. So the cost depends on the production of items. How many items was produced? That's what's going to change the cost. So X is the independent variable, which is the number of items produced. And Y is the dependent variable because the value of Y depends on the number of items that are produced. Okay, so if we were to use the information from the context to come up with 2 points, it says for 650 items, that's our X, because that's the number of items, it costs $46,700. Let me actually erase this comma because it might get confusing with the comma from the ordered pair. Now, the other ordered pair, when it's 540 items, it costs $40,100. Okay, so if I call this X1 and Y1, this is X2 and Y2. So we're going to find the change of Y over the change in X. That's Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. So if I take Y2 minus Y1, that's going to give me a negative 6,600. Now when I take X2 minus X1, I have 540 minus 650, which is 110, and it would be negative. Now, when I divide 6,600 by 110, that gives me 60. And the negatives, because I have two negatives, that makes it a positive. So my slope is 60. All right, now let's interpret what this means. I can rewrite this as 60 over 1 to help me figure out the change in Y over the change in X, if that helps. So X is the number of items produced, and Y is the cost to produce that number of items. So as I increase by 1 item, the cost increases by 60. So as the production increases by 1 item, the cost, that's the change in Y, increases by $60. Now, in your interpretation, it's really important, even I didn't say this in the last example, but it's really important to state whether it's increasing or decreasing, because if you don't say that, you don't know which way the line is tilted and how the two variables are affecting each other. So it's very important to discuss how each variable responds to the other. If one increases, one might decrease, vice versa, or as one increases, the other one increases, so you have a bunch of different situations. So make sure you explain what each variable does.